Real estate. If you want success, you know what you need? Real estate. You want to know how Bill Gates can be worth over $100 billion? That's right, real estate. Look at this watch. You know how much this watch cost me? It's $27 on Amazon because I don't invest in real estate. You're watching The Plain Bagel. My name's Richard Coffin, and today we're talking about real estate. But actually, yeah, that is the topic of today's video, but it's not going to be one of those videos. Real estate is one of those things that anyone who's figuring out their finances thinks about at one point or another because, well, there are plenty of millionaires out there who tell us it's the right thing to do. But buying your first house is nothing like buying your first stock. I know this because I'm currently looking at homes myself, and it's stressful, emotional, depressing in the current environment to say the least. But of course, we should always ask ourselves whether we should buy a house in the first place. And I'm not talking about whether it's a good investment and whether it will outperform stocks or whatever, but whether we can afford it, whether it will be something that we can commit to and have the ability to stay at. And this is something everyone needs to figure out for themselves. These are things I'm currently asking myself, and today I wanted to share the lessons, rules of thumbs, and pros and cons of buying a house that I've come across through research, talking to people that are way smarter than myself, and a lot of reading that will hopefully help you answer this question for yourself. Now, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of what to look for in a house when you're browsing the market because you need to figure out whether a house is even viable in the first place. But if you are interested in checking that out, there are some great books on Blinkist, which is sponsoring today's video. For those of you who don't know, Blinkist is an app that summarizes nonfiction books and their key insights in 15 minutes or less, so that you can read or listen to the lessons from the book without having to sit down and read through it. And they have some great real estate pieces on there. Zillow Talk is one that talks on a high level about whether you should buy a house and what to look for. And there's also Nolo's Guide to Buying Your First Home, which is a little bit more pro-buy than I would encourage, but it does offer some more practical things to look for when buying a house. And as you probably know, there are plenty of other topics on Blinkist. They have books on everything from money and investments to parenting, productivity to science. And the list really does go on. And the nice thing is that the books are segmented into blinks, which are like chapters, and it's very easy to pick up and put down where you left off. So while reading is obviously one of the best ways to learn, this is a nice substitute when you don't have the time of day to grab a book and sit down to read for a few hours. So if you go to Blinkist.com/theplainbagel or the link in the description below, the first 100 people will get unlimited access for 1 week. And if you decide you want to continue after that, it will take 25% off the full membership fee. So I encourage you to go try it out. If you're considering buying a house, the 2 books I mentioned were great. And thank you Blinkist for sponsoring today's video. Now, before we go any further into the topic of buying a house, we need to do a reality check on whether you can afford a house at the moment. After all, a home purchase is a huge investment, one of the biggest we ever make in our lives. So you need to make sure you have your finances in order and that you earn a high enough salary to afford it. You don't want to put your financial well-being at risk. So let's start with the basics. How much house can you afford? The general rule of thumb, and I mean general, that people use here is 3 times your pre-tax household salary. If you make $70,000 a year, then anything above $210,000 may be too expensive. But remember, this is household income. Having a partner that you plan to buy a house with means you'll be able to afford more if they're working as well. So if the 2 of you both make $70,000, then that's a $420,000 limit. Now, this isn't a hard rule. There are plenty of other factors you need to take into account that should affect the maximum house price you look at. Do you have any other debt you need to pay off? Do you have children, or are you planning on having kids in the next few years? As with any rule of thumb, it doesn't apply to everyone, and there are certain adjustments you'll need to make for your unique circumstances. A more specific gauge that you can use, though, is the 30% rule. This is a bit more complicated to calculate, but trust me, it's worth doing the math. Here, we want to make sure our housing costs don't exceed 30% of our gross, so pre-tax, monthly income. If you and your partner together make $140,000, then you shouldn't be paying more than $3,500 a month on housing expenses. Now, these housing expenses don't just include your mortgage payments. They're also your electricity, heating, property taxes, insurance, condo fees, anything that you pay because you own your house. It's also worth tossing your phone and internet bills in there. And importantly, any other debt payments you have going on. Now, it might be hard to try and mentally calculate what these expenses would be for your specific situation, but let's go through a quick example with some assumptions to iron out what the math looks like. Imagine you are buying a house for $400,000. This might seem expensive in some areas, but in Ottawa, it's actually a little below average at the moment. You have a 20-year mortgage for which you've put 20% down, meaning you've already paid $80,000 and are borrowing $320,000 to pay for the rest of the house. 20% is the minimum you need to pay to avoid CMHC fees in Canada, which are a kind of mortgage insurance that can cost up to 4% of the home's price. So it's a good floor to set for yourself. We'll say your fixed mortgage rate is 3%, a pretty standard rate for someone with good credit at the moment. With these numbers, your mortgage payments will be $1,772 a month. Now, each month you're also paying property tax, which is roughly 1% of the home's value on a yearly basis. So that's another $333 a month. We'll also assume that utilities, insurance, your phone bill, and internet all cost you roughly $270 a month. With this example, you'll be paying around $2,375 a month to own the home. Luckily for our couple making $70,000 each, this falls within their 30% rule, so the home checks out. But obviously there are a lot of assumptions made here, and you may find yourself paying more for insurance or less for utilities. If you're interested in playing around with the numbers for your own circumstance, Realtor.ca has a great mortgage calculator that lets you sub in your own assumptions and compare different scenarios. I'll leave a link in the description below where you can check that out. But these two rules, the 3 times income and 30% rule, can help you roughly determine the price range you can look at when buying a house. But obviously your income level isn't the only thing you need to take into account. Your savings are just as important to consider because A, you'll need to make your down payment when you buy the house, which in our example was a whopping $80,000 for 20% down. And B, you'll need to pay what are known as closing fees, which can cost quite a bit, but typically fall below $10,000 for first-time home buyers. These closing fees include lawyer fees, title insurance, inspection costs, and land transfer tax, which varies by province but is actually rebated for first-time homebuyers in Ontario, BC, and PEI. And even if you have savings for these two figures, you'll still want to have more put aside as a rainy day fund. A rainy day fund is always a good idea to have, but it's even more important when it comes to buying a house. I know it might seem like a good idea to put everything you've got towards your down payment, but when you own, you take on all the risks that come with the house. And that includes a lot of parts with finite lives. If you experience problems with your furnace, AC, water heater, or roof, you could be on the hook for thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. And that's on top of unexpected costs life already might throw at you, regardless of your living situation, like medical bills or car repairs. So make sure you have the cash to absorb added costs. A rule of thumb we've highlighted before on this channel is 3 months' salary put into a savings account, but your unique situation may call for more. So those are the numbers involved with buying a house, and maybe they check out with your bank account. But on top of all of this, there are a couple of qualitative questions you need to ask yourself before taking the leap. Firstly, are you able to commit to a location for more than 5 years? Will you be working here for the foreseeable future, or do you need the flexibility to move? There are fees associated with selling a house that often outweigh closing fees for buyers. So buying and selling rapidly can put a drain on your capital. It's also not a great idea to sell right after buying because the balance of your mortgage will still be very high. After all, your mortgage payments are split between interest and principal. And early on, interest takes up more of that payment. So the debt balance doesn't actually fall by that much until later on. Eventually, the principal will make up more of the payment, meaning you'll get to keep more of the house when you eventually sell and move, but it could take some time to get to that point. Secondly, can you take the added risk of a home ownership? The truth is, buying a house is risky. And just like any investment, it needs to match your own risk tolerance. And yes, while you are building equity in a house when you buy it, like a big piggy bank, that money is illiquid. It's hard to access in a hurry since you need to sell your house to get it. So you can't really rely on that in an emergency. So consider your risk factors. If you work for a commission, for example, it doesn't mean you can't buy a house, but you might want to be more conservative with your figures since your income will be more volatile and you don't want to end up in a bad spot. So take the time to seriously consider these questions. And if something doesn't look right, that's fine. It's okay to wait until you get things in order, figure out your finances and what you're doing with your life. Now, I know in Canada, it certainly doesn't feel like waiting is an option. Prices have been rising like crazy and I've seen it firsthand. My wife and I put an offer on a house that ended up selling for $100,000 above asking, no conditions, and short closing date. How do you compete with that? But the truth is, no one knows where housing prices will go tomorrow, next year, or 3 years from now. And the past does not predict the future. The long-term price appreciation of real estate is only around 3%, so it's not normal for prices to rise as quickly as they have been in Canada. Maybe population growth, low interest rates, and speculation will continue to grow prices. Or maybe the near-record household debt to disposable income will eventually stall housing demand. At the end of the day, we can't predict what the market will do. And honestly, you probably shouldn't buy your first house for its return anyway. That's not to say it's not an important factor. You obviously want to consider where you're buying and how much you pay. Even I'm closely watching the market to figure out a good entry point. But you probably aren't going to sell the moment prices are up like you might a stock or a bond anyway. So since we don't know what the markets are going to do, and since we probably won't treat the house like an investment anyway and transact accordingly, focus instead on the affordability, suitability to your needs, and longevity of your first purchase. If after you figured out house number one, you want to look into real estate investing more, great. But let's focus on getting through the first alive before we start building our real estate empire. Hi, Graham Stevens? Yes. Yeah, the Lauderdale one. Just leverage it up. I have 3 tenants waiting on this. Thanks for watching. Okay. If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. Any feedback or topics you want me to cover, we'd love to hear from you in the comments section. Thanks for watching. Yeah, Shoreline 3 sounds great. All right, bye.